This happened in the early 2000s. I was living the single mom life with my 3 older kids. I was working a full-time evening shift, and my best friend would keep the kids for me. It was early fall and still mowing weather. I would always fill my lawnmower up, and I kept a 3-gallon gas can full under my porch. My neighbors have 2 teens, a boy and girl, that liked to bully the smaller kids in my neighborhood. I'd chase them out of my yard a few times when I'd catch them trying to get into my storage shed. Their dad had traded for them a 4-wheeler that they would constantly be on. After they got it, my gas can would mysteriously go empty every time I went to refuel. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what was happening to it. Well, enough was enough. I went out and purchased an identical gas can, filled it with about 2 gallons of water, then added a half-gallon of gas. To give it the fuel smell still. I locked the real one on my back porch, put the bogus van under my porch, then waited. Within a couple of days, the little brats were throwing a massive fit because their 4-wheeler was toast. Yeah, it sucked to be them. As I said, these little monsters enjoyed destroying other people's property. One of their favorite pastimes were tearing up Halloween decorations and smashing pumpkins. That year, I bought close to 20 pumpkins that would only get smashed on the street in front of my house. My kids were devastated. They also loved tearing up the stuffed scarecrow on the next-door neighbor's porch. I managed to get together some old, worn overalls, a straw hat, and a ratty-looking long-sleeve button-up shirt. I stuffed it and sat it out on my porch on Halloween Day. I had asked my bestie to take my kids trick-or-treating because I had a treat for the teen monsters and their friends. I waited till dark, shut off the porch light, and brought in the scarecrow, put on the clothes and hat, painted my face, and went back outside in the chair with a huge bowl of candy and a sign saying, "Take one, please." My best friend waited till I was settled, turned the porch light off, and left with my kids. I had a few little Supermans, princesses, ghosts, and clowns come up, and yeah, they'd grab more than one, but not overly much. About half an hour into my evening, I heard the brats coming up the road. They immediately started smashing the pumpkins and yanking down decorations. 3 of them ran up on my porch, one grabbing the bowl and the other 2 went to grab the poor scarecrow. Only the scarecrow, me, suddenly sat up with the deepest, harshest, loudest growl and grabbed one of the boys closest to me. I've never seen people actually fly before, but they were screaming like nobody's business running down the street. A cop pulls up less than a minute later, says he had been getting complaints about these kids and was trying to catch them in the act. But he'd seen the entire exchange on my porch and he couldn't quit laughing. I didn't have much problem after that. I kind of let it slip. My house was haunted, though. They moved within the next month after the boy got arrested for breaking into someone's house up the street. Okay, so I shared my little story to a few friends on Discord and was told to share it with you fine people. This all happened a little over 10 years ago when I was just starting out in my mechanic career. It's a bit of a long read, but I believe it's worth the time. Due to the nature of the story, some parts locations will be vague. Looking back now, I probably went a little too far at first, but apparently fate had other plans in the end. So, to start off a little backstory. I grew up on a farm on the East Coast. Lots of hard work with no pay, and being from a less fortunate family, we never had much. Growing up this way helped me appreciate what little I had, though. Once I was 16, I bought a car with a blown motor and rebuilt it while in auto class. I loved that car. While working for an auto parts store, my mother decided to move down south. Parents were divorced long ago, and since my stepmother was a total witch, druggie, ruined my father's business, that kinda witch, I decided to leave everything behind and move in with my mother a few states away a few months after turning 18. I barely had enough to get there. Once there, I helped pay the bills with my auto parts store job. For Christmas that year, Mom couldn't get me anything. We were barely getting by, so I scraped up enough to get myself a stereo for my car. A cheap one, but nice to 19-year-old me, and for her, a gold-plated necklace she hung on her rear-view mirror. She cried when I gave it to her and still tears up when I talk about it. We lived in a trailer park surrounded by trees covered in Spanish moss, hidden from the main road and a few miles away from the nearest town. We knew our neighbors well, as there were only around 8 other trailers on this lot. Nice people, apart from one that was next to us. I'll call him Chad. Chad was in the military and worked on a nearby base. He was also an MP. As such, he never cared when he or his buddies were being too loud at night, left trash everywhere and refused to clean it up, and generally was just a jerk to everyone. He even cussed out a 90-year-old lady for asking him to clean up the bottles him and his friends threw into her rose garden. The whole neighborhood hated Chad and his jerk friends. One spring, I blew a head gasket in my car, so I was in my little driveway parked next to my mom's car. Her partner's truck was parked in front of the trailer out of the way. Anyway, late one night, as I was working on my car, Chad's buddies were making their drinking rounds, walking all over the park, throwing bottles everywhere, and just acting like the jerks they are. They saw me working on my car and came right over to make fun of me for being poor, not having a better car, still living with my mom at 19. Everything. I tried to just ignore them since I was not a confrontational person. I asked them to let me be so I can get this done. After this, they just made a little bit more fun of me and left when they realized they weren't getting a reaction from me. Later on, they all went into Chad's trailer and continued partying, so I packed up my tools and parts and took everything inside. Ensured all our doors were locked and went to bed. That morning, I woke up to the doors of all of our cars open and the cars were ransacked. I was mad. The missing stuff were my stereo, my mom's gold necklace. I got her and her partner's truck's stereo. It was an expensive HUD style. We called the cops and they didn't want to do anything about it. As the donut patrol was talking to me saying, "This isn't worth the department's time," something in me snapped. I politely said, "Okay, I get it. We'll be sure to keep a watch out for next time," and then the cops left. I went inside and started thinking of how I was going to get even. No one will make my mom cry. So I went to Chad's door and asked him where our stuff was. He was hungover, and I woke him up at 7 a.m. He was not happy, but let it slip that he doesn't know where his friends took it. So I had him. I told him he has 24 hours and nothing will be done. He laughed it off and slammed the door in my face. It was on. Later that night, a huge storm came. Heavy rain, lots of thunder, the works. So at 1 a.m. I dressed up in some old clothes and thermals, grabbed my tools, and went out to his car. He had a nice new Lil Nissan, and to me it looked a little too nice. I got under it and took off everything I possibly could without being caught. I unbolted every nut, cut every wire, cut a few holes in the gas tank, sliced his tires from the inside sidewalls, and took off the oil pan. I went ape crazy on this poor Lil car. My father was a mechanic for many years, and growing up with him, I learned a lot about how to destroy a car without being noticed. Thanks to the storm, Chad never heard a thing. After a few hours of getting my revenge, I went back inside and cleaned up. Tossing my clothes in the wash and going to bed happy I was able to cause him some peril. The next morning, I woke up to the blissful sounds of him cursing and punching his car that had no chance in hell of ever working again. All those parts of his car that I threw into a small pond just over the fence near the edge of the lot, they'll never be found. He was so angry he broke all the glass and dented several body panels. The cops were called, and they asked around. Everybody said he had anger issues and was within reason that he would take it out on his own car. Or his wife, who was hardly around due to him being him, but they had a kid, so I guess they were making it work somehow. The cops, being the lazy people I knew them to be from the day before, didn't do a thing and chalked it up to him having issues and left. For any other revenge story, this would be it, right? I got my revenge and he has to pay. Oh, but as fate would have it, I was but a cog in life's plan to give him what he had coming. I never planned this part, but it makes me smile every time I think back. So since he didn't have a car anymore, he had it towed off. His wife, at least I thought it was his wife, would come over. One thing that perplexed me is there was no kid in tow as usual, and her voice was different. So I got a webcam and set it up in my window, a perfect spot to see who was coming in and out. After a little over a month, I compiled every photo of the people that the camera caught getting into the house into a folder and caught his wife bringing their son by when he was out one evening. I asked her to come in and I showed her everything. She was livid. She was so angry she called her dad and ordered a U-Haul. I helped her gather anything she said was hers, including a 55-inch TV, It was 2009. Those were still very nice. The fridge and even the washer and dryer. She gave me $100 for my time, hugged me, and thanked me over and over for letting her know just how much of a jerk he really is. That's when I told her he did me wrong too, and explained what had happened to me and my family. She was slack-jawed and called her dad again. She told me this wasn't over, and she felt so bad for us having to deal with him. An hour later, she came back with her dad, and he gave me another $200 and said he was very appreciative that someone did the right thing. He shook my hand, thanked me again, and I never saw him after. The most amazing thing was when Chad came home after drinking and realizing all the stuff was gone. He destroyed the trailer, kicked out walls, windows, ripped off the door, everything. Cops were called again by the old lady neighbor, and he was put in cuffs and taken away. He was never heard from again, but I was told from the nice landlord who owned the whole lot he was on the tab for all the damages and for rent and took him to court. They had to wait because apparently he made a fuss at the station and hit a cop. I don't know what happened after because we later moved from there. So his life is probably still ruined, and I couldn't care less. I bought Mom another necklace, me another stereo, and Mom's partner one too. It wasn't as good as his old one, but it was still nice. I then told him the full story over some drinks with his friends and had the best night ever. Take care of your mechanic friends. Many years ago, I rented an apartment for 2 years and never had any issues, always paying rent on time. At the time, I used an online bank that didn't issue checkbooks, so I would enter a check amount and the recipient online, and the bank would print it up and mail it out. This is how I paid my rent, and these checks expired 90 days after the date they were written for. Anyways, after I moved out, I had to pester my landlord for about 2 months to get my security deposit back, which was the same as 1 month's rent. I called and texted him dozens of times and never got a response. So one day on the 1st of the month, I staked out my old building because I knew he always came to collect the rent checks that people would slip into the mail slot. When he showed up, I confronted him, and he told me he hadn't gotten back to me because he was in the hospital with a heart attack and that he would not be giving my deposit back because the cupboards were dirty. They weren't. I wiped down every surface, and there was some mold above the shower, which was true, but it was minimal and the paint and drywall were not damaged. He told me I should have told him about the mold and he would have handled it before it got that bad. I probably could have challenged it somehow, but I was young. It was my first time renting, and I was unfamiliar with renters' rights. Fast forward another month or two, and he calls me up and tells me one of my rent checks bounced. I told him that's impossible because the money is placed on a hold as soon as the check is printed. Then he changes his story and says his secretary lost the check behind the desk and they found it more than 90 days later. I told him he should have told me he lost the check and I would have canceled it and sent a new one, but since he held on to my security deposit for no legitimate reason, I was not feeling inclined to help him. I hung up and never heard from him again.